This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Bufall, joined by Steve Maresca, Michael Grandy.
It's like you've never met me before.
Here we are.
Well, you know, the trouble is I looked at both of you for a second. I'm like, wait, what do I say first?
We switch it up.
We do. And,
it's all good.
You know, you got those good-looking glasses on. I was thinking about that for a second. So.
Very erudite.
Oh yes.
So today we're actually gonna do something I think a little different. I'm not sure we've done
it's been a while.
What we're calling it in the news section. I think we've had different names for it over the last couple of years. But there have been a few pretty notable or high profile events, right?
But they're all good news though, right? This is only going to be flowery and very positive.
In the good news,
or is this the reality of?
I find so anytime I do the security awareness training, about midway through, I always feel like I have to say, like, I just feel like I'm doom and gloom. Like there's nothing, it's all about, here's all the bad things that happen to you if you do this.
These are all unpleasant things for the people directly affected by them. We're going to turn the corner into making them opportunities for something nice.
That's right.
That's right.
So let's talk about the first opportunity then.
Oh boy.
It's a whopper.
It's a whopper, but it's twofold. So we're going to turn this topic a little bit into everybody invests in security tools, right? Whether that be, in this case, spam and phishing protection, or your EDR space, right? We're obviously talking about CrowdStrike there, and there's a huge Proofpoint vulnerability as well. And I think rather than rehash the technical issues that sort of caused the CrowdStrike outage, for example, it's probably more valuable for us to spend a little bit of time about, how do you responsibly utilize some of these technical controls? How do you mitigate against the potential problems that, like a CrowdStrike had? Right? It was huge, widespread issues. Really, everybody's read it, right? What do we do going forward with security products, security vendors? I think that's the topic we want to discuss.
We have a twofold problem, I suppose. CrowdStrike is pervasive in an environment where it's deployed. EDR is as well. Proofpoint, being for email protection, it's in the middle of everything.
Right. That's
a shared characteristic here. If either one of those types of platforms falls down because of a compromise or an actual outage, everyone has impact from a business perspective. So on the one hand, it's a business continuity discussion. What do you do when you can't transact your business, and do you have a backup for it? And the other is, how do you use those tools in a way to make the pain more pleasant or your recovery time shorter?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And we're in a mode now where we've accepted vendors updating their software on our behalf. And
desirable.
I was going to say, I want to make sure that we don't try to suggest in any way to people that they turn off these automatic updates or anything like that, right? Because they're hugely beneficial.
Which, just so we're clear, was one of the contributing factors to the CrowdStrike event. We don't have to get into the particulars, but it was something delivered that people did not necessarily feel they have control over.
And every vendor's doing it, right? Microsoft, automatic updates, Mac, everybody. So how do you keep these enabled and protect yourself? I think that's really the key element here.
Yeah, I think it's true. And ultimately continue to have them enabled, but alter maybe the schedule that they're applied, or stagger systems so that you can test in one more tolerable area for an outage that is your more, tolerable user base, or something to that effect.
Is this something that is generally planned? When you're going through business continuity or disaster recovery plan, I don't know that someone ever says, well, a bad update or a bad patch, forces us to revert. Do we have a program that, or a process built in place for how we'll do this, how we'll sort of turn back the hands of time, go back to a prior revision, whatever it may be?
Yeah, change management practices
Absolutely.
Used to be really common. I think if you went back, I don't know, you keep me honest in this, 15 plus years, I feel like there was the common approach of mistrusting Microsoft's automatic updates and wanting to wait a week or two, and then always putting them into a test environment first. And then as issues became less and less common, trust grew to the point where people said, I'll just let them update.
Yeah.
And now we're in a situation again where we see you really do want to be careful with that.
This is a pendulum that swings all over the place. You get burned by an issue that you needed to deploy quickly. You really wanted those things in place. You've made the process more laborious. There's no happy medium. It's trying to find something business appropriate that doesn't cause undue impact, but simultaneously lets you do your job. A lot of business continuity incident response preparatory work focuses more on supply chain impact. Vulnerabilities, zero-day flaws, that type of thing. And this kind of resembles that realistically. It's just trying to stack the deck for what tools you have in place so that you can actually recover quickly. And a lot of that is good inventory of your assets, out-of-band, offline copies of documentation, systems that are deliberately, intentionally dissociated from updates so that you have something as a stepping stone from which to rebuild an environment if you don't have an update that goes well. So those are the types of easy practices.
Yeah, it's not about eliminating impact, right? It's just reducing.
Exactly. And the change management side of it's really important too. There are always applications or groups of systems that have organizational inertia that prevents them from being updated, or a vendor that has an issue to patch in a timely manner, you name it. That stuff you have to treat individually in test environments, but it's challenging.
So the shift for a second to the Proofpoint issue, right? Like, is that a configuration issue? I mean, obviously, I think it's a little bit bigger than that, but
so the Proofpoint issue in this particular case, just to put it in a sentence, was a flaw in a default configuration that enabled most folks deploying some of their spam and anti-phishing technology to have their domains impersonated with ease. And I think some of this is the architecture being very complex and requiring a lot of evaluation to use appropriately. And some of it has to do with just not toggling the things that are in documentation, but not part of the
express
demo
setup.
recipe. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And
the express setup. Right?
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about that is, I feel it from a sort of, let's say, a corporate email perspective, phishing campaigns. It feels over the last several years that both the testing side and also the filtering side of so many of these products has become really sort of really inhibited some progress, or you're not sure, is this email the days of check your spam folder, felt like we sort of lost that for a while. We're back into that, or go into quarantine, make sure my message didn't get hung up. So I think there's probably some reticence in some organizations about putting overly, stringent guidelines in place.
It's true.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's made more complex with the shift from on-prem to hybrid to fully cloud, and vestigial system configurations. It produce all manner of interesting things that occur there. Yeah. Not to mention, Google on a phone or an iPhone with mail, they remove some of the UI ability for you to determine whether a message is legitimate or not. So there's no simplicity here. It's just evaluate everything being deployed in line that protects your systems or gives you a leg up against an attacker, and make sure that if something were to fail, if you can actually get around it easily.
Yeah, mitigate that.
Right.
Yeah. All right, we'll shift into, you pick. Which one do you want to talk about next?
I think it's worth talking about the IP6 vulnerability from Patch Tuesday. Yeah, okay. It's an important one. This is a Patch Tuesday issue from August.
Yeah, August 13th.
The week before recording. Yep. And this is a flaw in the IP6 protocol stack in Windows systems. And, there are lots of folks who go, IP6, what is that? And it's deployed everywhere by default for the most part.
Deployed, but how heavily utilized?
It almost doesn't.
That's one of the challenges.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter though. Yeah. If it's on, it's on.
It's on. Yeah.
And there are lots of places where it's in place because they're ISP, like Comcast, big IP6. They've invested heavily, and lots of devices are using it transparently. This is a wormable flaw. It's not currently exploited at the time of recording, but needs to be attended to very quickly and efficiently by every organization that hasn't otherwise disabled IP6. Patch if you can, disable 6 if you don't need it. That's it. Then you'll
but stagger your patches. right? Per our previous discussion.
Prior advice. Yeah.
All rollouts warrant that, right? Yeah. That's it on this one. It's sort of evolving. I expect it will be weaponized probably in the next week or so. It's basically something that, you send a packet across the network, game over.
So I want to spend 1 second on this because it goes back to our security 101, fundamentals concept. So many of the incidents that we encounter are a result of not patching, and where attackers take advantage of known vulnerabilities.
Right.
Things that are published like this, where you can anticipate a worm or it being used maliciously, you need to expedite your patching. You need to make sure that you're updated as quickly as you can, because it's a real risk.
And this is a really good example of where some engineers might say, oh, that doesn't affect me, and move on and say, all right, we'll just do our usual patch cycle. That may not be appropriate here. Right. Sometimes you have to dive a little deeper into whether or not you're susceptible, even if you think the technology is unused. And this is an excellent example of that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that one of the other current thing, 2.9 billion user accounts through the National Public Database about a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a massive number.
Yep. It's not the first background checking organization to have their stuff breached either, but major impact.
I mean, that is a huge number there, because we have breaches all the time.
Yeah.
I think people are somewhat numb to the idea of getting these notification
every
letters
letter
now,
that
right?
you get, it's terrible.
And I really do think people have to just assume that their data has been exposed in some way, right? I mean, 2.9 billion, in and of itself, but then you've got all these other, preceding ones that happened over the years.
Ticketmaster,
you made a statement. What's that?
Ticketmaster is another one in recent news too.
Yeah, I mean, your statement, we were talking about it, was 2.9 billion, and people aren't even going to bat an eyelash.
No, they won't.
Right? I mean, that's where we're at with these.
It's true. It's just background noise for a lot of people. And, this one's a little interesting in that the affected entity has been called out for scraping personally identifiable information from sources that had nothing to do with the people having their background checks performed, meaning there are impacted people who had no background check. That's a problem. But I think turning the corner into how you react to it is maybe the most important thing.
It's just, you just reminded me of that case of was it Ancestry.com, where there was sort of
23andMe, another one.
23andMe, maybe that's what it was. They had user data for family members who weren't on the database.
Right.
Taken.
Yeah, it's easy to get that.
Yeah,
I think the main takeaway is freeze your credit and take advantage of credit monitoring services offered to us, because we have one in the mail every other month.
That's right.
And if you're not familiar with freezing your credit, right, all the credit bureaus have the ability for you to, they call it freezing, but it's basically locking your credit against it being evaluated at the time of, somebody trying to request a loan or open up a credit card or something like that. There's 4 major credit bureaus. You have to do your freezes at each one individually. It is a security scenario that I would say is a little bit cumbersome. I wouldn't say complicated, but cumbersome.
I could call it, zero trust for credit.
That's
essentially.
It's free in most states. I'm not sure if it's free in all states, but most states it's free. The process to unlock is pretty straightforward. So if you actually are buying a house or buying a car or open up a credit card, the challenge, of course, is typically lenders don't know which credit bureaus they're going to check. So you have to unfreeze all 4. So that's a little frustrating.
And do know that there are services that are monitoring credit out there that will do this on your behalf. So there are other ways to do this other than just going to the bureaus themselves. But it's worth investigating.
It is.
It's taking control over who can see your information or use it to open up new accounts, which is the outcome we care about here.
And our recommendation always is, even if you've got children under 18, freeze their credit as well. So if you're a family of 4, you're potentially doing this 16 times, right? So it's a little effort.
I think the other, complementing statement could be, if you're concerned about how your data exists out in the open, consider taking a look at some of the data broker protection services so that you can have your data expunged where it's possible to expunge it. This is not the same thing as freezing credit, but taking some degree of control over what your personal
Right,
information
and it gives you some
used.
visibility
Yeah.
into how data being used.
Exactly.
Right. So, and information is always good.
Mhm.
I mean, those are the three things that we had, and I don't want to overblow this because I think getting the information out there. Certainly, the IP6 vulnerability one is important. Patch as soon as you can. Yeah, good.
No, just going back to the beginning for a brief moment, sort of as we wind up here. Do you think the major firms like a CrowdStrike are going to change some of their ways?
Every time something notable like this occurs, there are measurable positive improvements.
Right.
Microsoft had a fabulous stint from, mid 2000s up through the present with a lot of their security practices. They've had some lapses, but they did that as a reaction to the way that they fell down in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it had major observable quality improvements. This is a QA problem at CrowdStrike, and they've already come out and made it clear what changes they're making in that regard. Right. Other vendors are actively reevaluating their own processes, so this will have ripple effects elsewhere in terms of how updates are rolled out.
It'll be an industry benefit.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. And it was a huge blow to CrowdStrike, but I would say it doesn't make them a bad product, right?
No.
They had a mistake. It impacted, because of their market share, impacted a lot of people. It's a practice that most companies are using now. I think one of the challenges is, CrowdStrike has maybe more access into the operating system, right? So the impact was potentially greater.
I suppose, but that's a truth in most of the similar competitors that exist.
In that space, in particular.
Yeah.
You need it in order to do what they're doing. So, net positive after the fact, maybe an unpleasant moment while it existed.
But I would agree. I mean, the industry will benefit from that misstep.
And as we talked about in that part of the segment here, every organization that was directly impacted will emerge stronger because of the things that they think about to make it easier the next time around.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, as always, if there's anything that somebody wants to dive into on these topics, or if there's something in the news that you feel we've egregiously missed, let us know. We'll talk about it. And we, as always, hope you got value out of this and learned something. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yep.
You got it.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.